guys, it's Attilee, and welcome to the very first installment of a new series that I'm calling Attilee on Animation, where for several weeks we'll sort of turn our attention towards an animation studio that I feel is prominent or deserves attention. And in looking at this studio, instead of maybe looking at some of the more prominent or well-known works that the studio has distributed, we'll look at some lesser-known films or sort of hidden gems that the studio has produced that I think deserve a little bit more attention, a little bit more focus, as well as some more in-depth digging as to how that film compares to their collection as a whole, sort of seeing the motifs, the themes that run between the lesser-known films versus the larger collection, as well as just sort of taking stock of the creative minds that come behind the works and sort of how those things can really influence the creation of a work as well. The animation mecca that is sort of starting us off here at Attilee on Animation is the Japanese animation house Studio Ghibli. And the first film that we're going to be looking at for Studio Ghibli is their 12th film by your guys' request. It's The Cat's Return. The film is, I think, a really great example of a lesser-known work. I know I've talked a little bit about sort of my experience with Ghibli and how every single winter break that I've had since my freshman year of high school, I try and watch as much of the library from their films as I can. And The Cat's Return is one that I've watched one or two times, I think just once maybe. So it's not one that's really fresh in my mind whenever I think of the studio, so I think this is a perfect example of one that really deserves a second peek, especially from me. So just to sort of start us off before we get into the deep dive of dissection, I thought it could be really useful to sort of hear some fast facts about the film, some behind the scenes information, as well as just sort of some development information that you guys might not be aware of, or you might be aware of, and this is just sort of like a little reminder for you guys. I don't know. So The Cat's Return was released in Japan in 2002 and was then subsequently released in the summer of 2003 in the United States. The Cat's Return is considered a spiritual sequel to a previous film from the Studio Ghibli's collection of films called Whisper of the Heart. I say spiritual sequel and not direct sequel in the sort of veins of like Toy Story versus Toy Story 2, in that there are carryover characters, as well as I think one or two themes that are present between Whisper of the Heart and The Cat's Return, but beyond that, the plots are very disconnected. The main protagonists, completely different animation styles beyond a few small elements, I would say. Wildly different, different direction, different writing, so different. But as sort of, we'll see in a couple other facts here, there are some connecting factors between the two films that sort of explain why they're spiritually linked or character linked, however you want to really view it. And actually, for anyone who's interested in what the next film will be and wanting to sort of get the jump on me watching it, if we want to treat this like a book club, the next film that I'll be watching is a personal favorite of mine, and again, the spiritual prequel to this film, Whisper of the Heart. So get on that if you want to be a part of Attilee on Animation Episode 2. The Cat's Return is the second of 3 total films from the studio that was not directed by either prominent directors, Miyazaki or Takahata, who are the, I'd say, yeah, 2 most prominent directors of the studio. I mean, if you look down the Wikipedia page, it's Takahata, Miyazaki. It's almost like tit for tat there. So instead of Takahata or Miyazaki, The Cat's Return is directed by Hiroyuki Morita, different director, which sort of explains sort of the reasons why maybe this one is more passed up, looks quite different than other films in the Studio Ghibli collection, potentially. And also, for anyone watching the dub like me, I have to watch dubs for animated foreign films, because just reading text as well as trying to pay attention to the visual elements is just impossible for me to keep up. I know some people are like, purist, but like, I can't, I'm sorry. But there are some pretty familiar voice actors, as Studio Ghibli really has a tendency to draw some pretty key players in American cinema, I would say. So for anyone listening that are like, oh, that voice sounds really familiar, I wonder who that is. Anne Hathaway plays Haru, our main protagonist. Tim Curry is the Cat King, for any of you guys who are big Rocky Horror fans like me. That's always fun, but he sounds quite different in this one. It took me a while to sort of pick that up. So yeah, so those are some familiar voices that might be present in this. I know it's always kind of fun to sort of play guessing games when it comes to voice actors in animation, so maybe that's interesting to you guys. Last fact, The Cat's Return is actually a spin-off from a previous project assigned to the studio from a Japanese theme park. It was a requested animated short regarding cats, and Miyazaki, when hearing this project, was like, oh, I have a great idea. We should pull the two cats from Whisper of the Heart, Muta and the Baron, and sort of make a short revolving around them. And sort of when the project fell through, the project sort of hung around, and what elements that had been designed around it sort of stuck and was used actually as sort of a testing ground for incoming directors to use as sort of a sandbox and to sort of show the studio their direction in film, which makes sense kind of to me that a different director beyond Takahata and Miyazaki is directing this film. The studio must have been impressed with Morita's work in sort of a pitch regarding the cat's return that they were like, yep, feature film. So, beyond fast facts, my overall opinion on this film is that it is a really charming film, but it's definitely not even close to in comparison to some of the classics from Studio Ghibli. But that doesn't mean it's worth passing up. It does have value within the collection of Studio Ghibli films, and I think it really does fit in well with the themes that have been addressed in previous films, with female leads, cats, birds, transformation, lots of secret and hidden places, fantasy. There's a lot of motifs and themes that I think really surround it. Although the themes, the more I think about it, are a little bit more muddled in this film than they are in comparison to other Studio Ghibli films. The themes in this case, I would say, are just sort of finding yourself, being true to yourself. That seems to be a lot of what the Baron continues to tell Haru over the course of the film, almost in kind of Yoda-ish ways. And here you can see me panicking because I know I'm going to start talking about Star Wars and that's going to get into an entirely huge mess, which it did, so we're just going to pretend that didn't happen. I do have some significant problems with this film that sort of hold me back from really enjoying it to its full extent that I wish I really could. And those largely lie in the fact that Haru, as our protagonist, as much as I love Anne Hathaway in the dub, and I think that her animation is beautiful and her character design is really interesting and just has that plainness that Chihiro does from Spirited Away, that in the most positive way, coming from a pretty plain girl here, that just makes them really relatable and you feel like you want to get to know them and you want to relate to them in the best way possible. But her direction as a character, unlike Haru and other female protagonists within the Studio Ghibli canon, just really is a lot of stop and go and is filled with wishy-washy decisions that I just find so frustrating. Across the board, throughout maybe like the first 50% of the movie, she continually seems to be both enthralled and repelled from the cat world that she's sort of very slowly being sucked into. And that's so frustrating. It's so frustrating because you either want her to completely want to be enveloped within this relaxing and total escape from the human world that she's having so many frustrations and difficulties on a teenager level, as well as just like, if not enveloped by it, she wants to completely separate herself and be like, no, I want to be a normal teenager who wants to learn what it means to be cool and date a guy that's totally out of my league. Like, one or the other, and she just really can't seem to make up her mind, which maybe is a teenager thing. I know for me, as a teenager, I was totally like that, and it's relatable, but in terms of telling a story and wanting people to get behind a character, I found that incredibly frustrating, because I could never really get behind Haru and root for what she wanted to do throughout the film, because she never really seemed to know what she wanted to do within the film. I mean, as soon as she arrives in the Cat Kingdom, she's like, yes, this is awesome! And then maybe like no more than 10 minutes later, she's like, I hate this! And it makes sense why she would hate it, but like to just have that big of a transformation is jarring and frustrating, and I didn't know what to do with myself when that happened, because I was like, what do you want, girl? Make up your mind. And I think because of her motivation sort of being this push and pull between wanting and not wanting the same thing, it becomes hard to sort of continue to propel forward the film. And for Ghibli films, that's not a huge problem with me lots of the time. There's pauses and moments that are just allowed to happen at their own pace, and that's a rarity, especially I feel like in a good portion of animation these days, in that things just have to keep going and have to keep occurring. But Ghibli films really allow moments to exist, almost in, Julie Andrews was describing her thoughts behind singing and how to close a song, and she's like, allow the notes to exist until they can't anymore. And that's sort of how I feel a lot of like sensitive and delicate moments are handled in Studio Ghibli films, but in this instance, it's really delicate moments like the tea party at the Baron's house when they're first sort of meeting each other feels awkward, and it should sort of have that magical like stillness quality that I think other Ghibli films have had previously, but it's just like, okay, why are we sitting here? Where's the motivation? We just got like our mission and we're just not moving. It's just, it's frustrating to me. But despite those small hang-ups, I do feel like the film is charming. It has a really interesting plot, but what really carries it for me is the secondary characters of Muta and the Baron, who, if I was sort of writing this film, I would have really preferred to step both of them up into the protagonist roles because they had much clearer goals across the board than Haru ever did within the film. Muta and the Baron's rapport is absolutely fantastic. They're constantly bantering back and forth. They have very full developed characterizations that Haru just lacks a lot of the time. She's just sort of a stand-in and almost a prop in certain instances. But the Baron and Muta, they don't exist for like 25% of the movie, but I feel like they're so much more interesting than Haru ever was, and that's so frustrating to me because I'm a huge fan of Studio Ghibli female protagonists, but Haru just doesn't have that spark like Chihiro does for me, just to sort of compare the two. Muta and the Baron, however, just really do have that drive and that lovability that just doesn't exist, unfortunately, in Haru. Above all, though, I do think this is worth your time. While I'm sort of being a little harsh on it, it's because Ghibli films are so great that when they fall just a little bit short of the expectations surrounding the film's library, it's not even that steep of a fall. I would say this is a solid B movie. It's a great animated film. The visual sequences are beautiful and an absolute treat in the eye. The colors are so saturated, but never in a sickly way. The animation is so fluid, and the movements of the cats are so spot on for cats, as well as anthropomorphized cats, that it's kind of unreal. And sort of getting to see, if you were a fan of Whisper of the Heart's Baron and Muta, getting to see them anthropomorphized in a much fuller context beyond the sort of fantasy scene that exists within Whisper of the Heart, regarding the Baron at least. It's really fun to sort of get to see a fuller version of those characters that isn't quite present in Whisper of the Heart, if you were a fan of that. Beyond that, I'd say this film is kind of comparable in sort of the action comedy styling of Porco Rosso, although it doesn't really have the vulnerability of Porco Rosso, I would argue. That's maybe what's lacking here. So if you're a fan of that, sort of anthropomorphized cats, wacky humor, teenage girl, not like drama, but not really drama, this is probably a film for you. It's definitely not one of my favorites from Ghibli, but it's definitely not my least favorite either, so I'd recommend it. I'd really love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on The Cat's Return, though. Is this a favorite of yours? Was I totally missing out on something that really stood out to you in a way that I just clearly didn't pick up on? Please let me know in the comments, as well as just any other thoughts on Ghibli films. I'd love to hear them. Again, for next time, we'll be watching Whisper of the Heart, which, if we're being fair, is a personal favorite of mine, so I will probably be a lot more mushy-gushy on that one than I was for The Cat's Return, but we'll see. I haven't seen that one in a while either, so I might sort of feel differently about certain elements and might be a little bit more nitpicky than I normally would be. You never know. Alright, until next time, guys. See ya!